Ever since I started earning any money, I have loved to travel. I've been doing it a lot throughout the last 15 years, starting with the most popular places in Europe, then reaching further and further for adventures I would have never dreamed of. I visited almost all of Europe, climbed the Himalayas, slept at the footsteps of the famous Patagonian ants, or had a hike to the stunning Machu Picchu. I've taken hundreds of flights and learned how to pack, how to save money and be able to travel on a budget. So in this video I will share with you not 10, not 20, but 50 best travel tips and hacks I've learned over all of those 15 years of traveling, so that you can learn them as well and instantly improve your travel experience. I put the tips into 5 categories: packing, airport, flight, accommodation and getting around places. At the end, there's one secret tip that is the most valuable and important thing I've learned over the years of traveling. Starting with packing. This one is so important and is oftentimes underestimated, but better packing can elevate your travel to a whole different level. So let's go with the first tip, which is preparing the stuff to pack a couple of days before leaving. I'm the person who does everything last minute, especially if I don't really like doing something. But it just happened so many times that I didn't have everything needed to pack ready, so it's always good to give yourself a day or two for additional laundry or to order something you're still missing. Number 2 is packing into one bag. And this is something I really advise you to do. I know it might not be for everyone, but it makes the travel a lot easier as you have all your stuff on your bag. And if the bag is small enough, you don't have to pay for it to get it on the airplane. Third tip is using a backpack instead of a suitcase. This is something I've learned over time and it suits my traveling style a lot better. But the thing is that it's a lot easier to walk around with your backpack, especially off-road or on cobblestone streets, which Europe is full of. The next tip is to stop overpacking. With every travel I've learned what stuff I really do not need and that I can get away with minimum amount of clothes easily. Many people like to have different outfit for every day, but it's so much more comfortable to have a small backpack instead of a giant suitcase that it makes much more sense for me to just use the same t-shirt twice or do a laundry. Another important packing tip is to have a comfortable backpack rather than a stylish one. One doesn't exclude the other, but the comfort should be number 1. The backpack can weigh a couple of kilograms, which can get really heavy after many miles of walking. That's when foam bag, comfortable shoulder straps and a hip belt helps a lot. Many backpacks that should only look good don't have those features, and in my opinion it's better to have a comfortable walk and enjoy it than have the most fashionable Instagram picture. Another hack is having a travel sling. I was talking about having only one bag, but the great thing about having a small sling or a fanny pack is that airlines allow you to take it on board and it's not considered as an additional packing item. You can place there your phone, documents, keys and everything you'd like to have easy access to. It makes the precious items also much safer than in your pockets or backpack. Tip number 7 is packing your liquids and electronics in an easily accessible place in your luggage. In general, you should pack your carry-on luggage having the airport security check in mind. If you have to take the liquids and electronics out, and you will have to, it saves you a lot of stress if you can do it quickly right away when you're preparing for the check. Now, the next thing is something that, when not applied, can actually make the travel not happen at all. The tip is to always check validity of all your documents and preferably do that a few weeks before leaving for the trip. I've heard it happening so many times that people had no longer valid passports, IDs, driving licenses or any documents that might be used during the travel that now I always try to check them before the travel. Number 9. Always check the airline's luggage regulations. It's a bit frustrating, but it's a must because every airline can have different regulations when it comes to the size and weight of the carry-on luggage, but also when it comes to the fees for checked-in luggage. Sometimes it's included in the base price of the ticket, sometimes it's not. Sometimes a small suitcase can be taken on board as a carry-on, but that's not always the case, especially for the budget airlines. So even if you're a frequent flyer of an airline, you should always check the regulations as they may change. The 10th tip is also very important, and it again is valuable to not overpack with unnecessary stuff. And it's about not packing the just in cases. So often we tend to pack things that we may use, or packing a tent for 2 weeks, although we might want to use it only once, but carrying it with us for the whole time. If you're not sure if you're gonna be using something, it's better to leave it at home, and if it turns out to be needed, you can rent it or buy it at your destination. In most cases, you will just save a lot of space in your backpack. The last packing tip is to make use of your electronics, preferably your phone. In one device you can have all of your maps, guidebooks, and maybe even movies and books if you're comfortable with watching them on smaller screens. Especially taking maps and paper guidebooks doesn't really make sense anymore, as there's so much digital content around that you can once again save yourself a lot of space in the backpack. Now getting to the second category of tips, which is airport and everything that happens there. Let's start with checking in ahead. This actually takes place still at home, but then has a major impact on what's going on at the airport. It has many advantages to be already checked in. You'll have more time for the security check, you won't have to wait in the line and go through the whole airport to find your airline stands, and you will also have all information about the flight on your ticket. The next tip is to double check where you need to go, and that applies to the terminal first. Many airports have many of them, and when you get to the cab or you're getting at the airport, you better know from which terminal you'll be leaving. Sometimes getting from one terminal to the other is half an hour of walking or even more. You should also check which gate is yours to approach, so that you don't wait until boarding to find out that again you have to walk across the whole airport. Tip number 14. Take some snacks with you. Now, the prices at the airports are ridiculously high, so if you know that you're a person that likes crunching every now and then, it's better to take something with you. For early morning flights, I usually have breakfast at the airport, as I'm not that hungry right after waking up, so it's good to not forget about food, as your travel may take several hours. And the next tip is also very important and saves you a lot of stress, as it is regarding probably the most stressful part of the airport time, which is going through security. And the tip is to be well prepared for it, meaning to not have bottles bigger than 100 milliliters with you anymore, to not have your hands full of stuff, as it may get chaotic as soon as you're asked to dispose everything into the trays. The next one is also important, and I've learned it the hard way. Don't get to the airport too late if you don't know it very well. It happened to me that because I didn't know the city and I got stuck in a traffic jam, or I didn't know the airport was so crowded and difficult to get around, I almost were late for the flight. So if you've never been to the airport, it's good to be a little bit earlier. On the other hand, which is tip number 17, don't go to the airport too early if you do know the airport, especially if it's a rather small one. If it's in a small city, the chance is high that there's just one TSA line, few gates, and not much more. And if you've been there already, you can easily make it for the flight if you arrive just 1.5 hours before the flight. You can use the save time at your travel destination to maybe enjoy one last delicious dinner. Tip number 18. Don't be too nervous at the security check. I know it can be stressful, but bear in mind that the authorities might want to check your luggage or do an additional search for explosives. It might happen that the scanner will beep, but those things happen, so try to stay composed, calm, and just follow the instructions, and nothing bad will happen to you. And the last airport tip is to not rush to the boarding as soon as the gates are opened, or even worse, to stand in the line before it happened. You can take your time, just keep an eye on the line that's starting to board. You can join the others at the very end, and as soon as you'll take a seat, the airplane will be ready to leave. You won't need to stand or to push through with elbows on board. The third category is airplanes. With those hacks, you can make the travel, even in economy, even if it's a long one, much more enjoyable. So the first one is to take a window seat. After all these years of traveling, it's a no-brainer for me right now, and I know many people prefer the aisle seat, but the possibility to lay down against the window and that no one bothers you when leaving their seat surpasses the downsides of it. The next airplane tip applies especially for those longer flights. The tip is to not book a seat close to the restroom. The smell and traffic is definitely something to avoid, so make sure to book a seat a bit further. Tip number 22 is to take some travel essentials that will make sleeping easier. Also important mostly for long-haul flights. On those I always have sleeping mask and earplugs with me. They make it so much easier to have a restful sleep as you're able to cut off the light and the noise. So make sure to take those with you. The next one is important because of the air on the airplane, which is very dry. That's why it's important to take care of hydrating your body properly. From the inside, with drinking water, especially before getting on the plane, even a day prior to that, and from the outside having a lotion, and especially if you use contact lenses, eye drops. The next tip is to take some means of entertainment with you. And for your kids, if you're traveling with them, so important. But that means that for the longer flights, download some shows, movies or ebooks. I prefer having a Kindle rather than paper books as they take much less space and you can have tons of books that you could read also on the way back if you finish the first one. And if you already want to watch a movie on the plane, make sure you have your own earphones with you. For some flights the airlines provide you those, but they are of low quality, so you might want to take your own, and if you don't do that and the airlines don't give you those, you can forget about watching anything. Now if you get hungry or thirsty between movies, it's good to have some snacks and a bottle of water with you. The food on the airplane is quite expensive and the meals that are free of charge might not be enough or might not be your favorites. I like to bring a sandwich or some nuts, which are very nutritious with me. Don't forget that you have to get your water after the security check at the airport, preferably by filling in your reusable water bottle. And the next tip is extremely important to get you a comfy flight. You should dress properly for it. Sitting in one position in stiff or heavy clothes and bulky shoes will make the travel so much worse. Usually I put sweatpants, a t-shirt and a hoodie on. This is way better than a shirt or tight jeans. And about the clothes, the temperature on the plane might get pretty low and especially when sleeping it might get too cold for you. So it's good to have an additional layer like a hoodie or a sweater with you that you can put on whenever you feel like it. And the last flight tip that might be actually also a packing tip is to have the right chargers with you. You can always check on the airline's page what airplane you'll be flying with and what sockets are available, but you should be able to charge all the devices you'd be using. And just in case, it's also good to have a power bank with you, just in case. Now getting on to accommodation. Some of the tips might be quite unpopular, but that's what worked best for me, saved me tons of money and made the travels way better. The first tip is to not book accommodation for every single night before going for the travel. Of course, if you're 100% sure what you want to do, it's good to do so, otherwise it will allow you to be more flexible and do what you prefer at the moment or adjust the travel depending on the weather. And I found out that in many places the last minute bookings can be cheaper than those made few weeks before. The next tip is to book the accommodation without breakfasts. Now you might not like that tip, but I have my breakfasts rarely at the place I'm staying at. The reason is that I need more flexibility for the time when I'll be eating. Sometimes I need to leave the place early in the morning, or I prefer staying in bed longer, and usually after 10 AM the breakfast isn't that good anymore. I usually prepare breakfast myself, what gives full control on the time and the stuff I eat, and I also enjoy local products, not necessarily the continental breakfast served in most hotels. Now the next tip is connected to the previous one. Since I rarely take bed with breakfast and I like to cook myself, I prefer having apartments like Airbnb instead of hotels. Having a whole place for me and my co-travelers is much better in my opinion. I also have the opportunity to stay in a place like the ones locals live in. And as mentioned, having a kitchen is a huge advantage for your time and your wallet. The next tip is also not for everyone, but if you have slept already in a tent and you like that, use it as much as possible. Taking a tent on a travel gives you the opportunity to sleep almost for free, and in some countries anywhere you want, as soon as it's not private property. Sure, it's less comfortable, but besides being cheap, it has also a specific vibe of sleeping in wilderness. Sleeping in a tent might be a bit extreme for some that prefer more comfort, I get that. However, the next tip is to not go crazy with the accommodation and booking 5-star hotels. I've been sleeping in those several times, and usually I was out all day and I was using it only to get a shower and sleep. And you don't need all of that fanciness for it, and that way you can save that money for other stuff. Because why would you want to stay at the hotel too much? My next tip is to stay there as little as possible. Even after a tiring day, you might want to spend the afternoon and the evening in the hotel room, but sometimes you wouldn't even expect that the best time might be when you go out that night and just go for a walk to enjoy the local culture and the town. Now the next tip is definitely something everyone should pay attention to. Choose the area of your accommodation wisely. Do a research on that. Few factors to consider are: is it a safe area? Is it close to the city center or the main attractions? And is it communicated well with subway, buses or whatever? Even the best hotel, if it's in a shitty area, won't make the travel a good time. The next accommodation tip is to not pay too much attention to the stars the hotel has got or the photos that were uploaded to their webpage. In many countries the stars don't mean too much and the photos might not show the reality. And that works both ways. Great apartment can have shitty photos and the other way around. Pay more attention to the ratings of others, their opinions and comments. The last tip regarding accommodation is to take a very close look at the facilities your place has. If you're traveling with a car, you need a free parking. If it's important for you, better have a Wi-Fi in that place. If you want to cook yourself, make sure there's a kitchen and so on. Whatever you need, make sure it's actually there. Some may say the parking is there, but it could mean a paid place on the street where you actually would have to find one first. Now the last category applies to the travel itself and what you'd be doing while on a trip. I called it getting around. And the first one is to make sure that for some popular attractions you have booked your entrance tickets in advance. For many places you need to book a spot, as they only let a certain amount of people in at a time. And of course they might be out of tickets, so you better have that checked and choose the date wisely as well. The second tip is to stay flexible if possible. Make a lot of stretching. No, just kidding. Well, it would be good for you, but what I mean is that you don't plan every single thing out in advance and leave room for doing what you want at that very moment. And that applies also to not having the whole travel guided, as you might want to do something else than it says in the plan. Now the next one is all about transportation. Usually the best way to use the transportation is the way the locals use it. In European cities the best way of going from place to place is by public transport. In Southeast Asia you might want to rent a scooter, if you're brave enough. So it's not always about getting a car, and that's the next tip. Don't always try to rent one, or you don't have to travel with it. Sometimes a better option is to have a bus or have a walk. I had some great adventures because I was traveling with the locals, or I just walked, which took much longer, but I had the opportunity to admire the surroundings. The next one is to improvise, adapt and overcome. You might have heard that one, and I believe it applies to traveling as well. It can get difficult, you may run into problems and there might be some unexpected things happening. Try to always be ready to improvise and adjust your plans, as it rarely works 100% as it was planned. The next tip is also so important. Make sure you know your co-travelers very well. Going for a travel with someone not fitting your traveling style might lead to a disaster, even ending a friendship. I believe you need to get very well along with someone to decide for a travel together. Number, I don't know what number, I stopped counting, but we're getting close to 50 probably. Well, the next one is to not eat in the most touristy areas. I live in a very popular city for tourists, and I hear it all the time that there's such a beautiful main square with the restaurants all around, so it would be great to eat there. But as a local, I know that these restaurants are overpriced and mediocre or worse. There are so many great places to eat outside the city center that it's difficult to decide where to go. So make sure to do a research for the place you're going to, where you want to eat to enjoy the best meals possible. Now, being a tourist might be difficult. Usually we are the best target for scammers, so you need to pay attention to it and avoid them at all costs. If a deal sounds too good or suddenly someone wants to help you without a reason, give it a second thought. Sure, there are good people all around the world, but additional cautiousness is very advised. The next tip might sound simple, but I see many people doing the opposite. Enjoy your time. Don't get overwhelmed with your to-dos. Don't try to rush everywhere and take photo of everything others are. Take it slow, enjoy the moment, and if you don't make it to see all the churches on the list, nothing will happen. One thing is to enjoy your time, and the other is to enjoy what the locals have to offer. That applies especially to the food. I still have some regrets when in my early travels I didn't want to try some of the food that was local in the places. You might never go back there, and if you think something might be disgusting, it probably isn't, as millions of local people are enjoying it. Now, the next tip is to respect the local culture and customs. I would advise you to take the time and learn a little bit about the foreign culture, and that you always look what the others are doing and follow them if you think this is how things are done there. Don't go somewhere with the "I know better" or "I'm from a civilized country" attitude. Remember, when traveling, we are only guests. Before we get to the last tip, one thing I want to mention is that I'm growing this YouTube channel to help others with their traveling. So if you find value in this kind of content, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Now the last tip, number 50, I hope so. Probably the most important one. Don't bow to pressure of others and don't always go crazy with the travel destination. Although I've visited some amazing places all around the world, I strongly believe you can have a great time and spend magical time with your loved ones just around the corner. Think how many places haven't you seen yet in your own country? So it's not always about going to the most crazy places to brag about it. Also, going for a week to a lovely place 50 miles away from your home can also be a travel of your life. Cheers, safe travels and do zobaczenia!